No. All right, I'm recording this now for all of those listening around the world in the Middle East. I will make no reference to me from now on. Okay. What is history? Now, in your textbook, this is the way that it starts, right? What is history? And that's what seems like a strange place to start, but maybe it's a good thing. How would you define history if I had that on the first test? The question is, what is history? What would you write? What comes to your mind? If somebody said, "Oh, you're in that history class. What is history?"
Do we like raise hands? Do we just call out?
Oh, you can call out. That's fine. I mean, unless it gets too, I don't think it's going to get too invigorated here. But we slow people down. But go ahead.
Anything from the past that we studied?
Anything from the past? That's a definition. Events from the past.
We make history right now, and it'll be past tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, now, here's the thing. I don't know, maybe you didn't eat any breakfast, but if you ate breakfast, that was in the past, I assume, unless you're planning to eat breakfast later today, then that is something that happened in the past. That is, I suppose, historical in one sense, but I really seriously doubt it's going to make it into any history book, right? Of course, we have now our media, right? Where it's all about me, right? So maybe you're the kind of person that takes a picture of every meal you eat and posts it to various social media. So you want everybody to know how nice your hamburger was. All right, so events of the past. But, history is more than just the events of the past. It's also trying to understand the events from the past, right? Because there are events. For example, if we walked out of here, or we went up on the roof of this building, and we looked down, and something happened. Let's say one of those golf carts, ubiquitous golf carts that we have, of which they never let me ride in. But one of those golf carts, let's say it mows down a person out on the main drag out here, right? What do we call it? El Prado? Is that what we call it? Okay, on El Prado, let's say we're standing up where we can see down, all of us, maybe up on the roof, and we see this cart hit somebody, and then somebody comes up to us and they separate us and they say, "Okay, tell us what happened." So we'd say that was a historical event. At this time, on this date, this cart hit that person. But I bet you our accounts of it won't be identical. Even if we can hear each other. If we can't hear each other, less likely. In other words, some people will notice different things. They'll notice maybe what kind of clothes the guy who was driving the cart was wearing. Somebody else will notice something about the cart that I didn't notice. Somebody will actually know the exact time maybe it happened, or we might dispute the time. Which direction was the cart coming? So what I'm saying is there are events that happen, but we won't all understand those events or even see those. Even if we're all eyewitnesses, we won't see them. Now, let's say we all write down our accounts, we put it in a book, and then somebody later on's got to read it and make sense of the event from 7 or 8, 10, whatever, different point of view. That's where history comes in. An event happened. Okay, we can agree. 10 people saw this happen. So somebody got hit by a cart on this day. But the details, and then part of the question would be, well, does it matter if the guy was wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt? Well, I suppose if the guy ran off on the cart and the police want to arrest him or something, it will make a difference. But, I suppose to the motivation, why did the guy run into the person? Was it purposeful? Was it accidental? Was he texting and driving? Or did he just, maybe he had some kind of medical event. Maybe he had a heart attack. I'm assuming it's a guy, right? So maybe not, maybe it's a woman. But maybe some medical thing happened. So those that all enter into it. And what I'm saying, I'm using that one event to say this could be about a lot of events, and then it gets kind of complicated the more moving parts there are. So history then is examining what happened in the past, but also examining the stories and reflections on that event. Now, some people would say history should just be the facts. There's an old television show that I imagine none of you have ever seen, unless you watch old reruns somewhere. It's called Dragnet. You ever heard of the show? Yeah, probably not. Yeah, you're all shaking your head no. Okay, I understand. It's an old show. You can look it up on YouTube or something. I'm sure there's some clips of it. It's about a police officer, Joe Friday. That was his name, actually, in the show, Joe Friday. And his partner, he had a partner. They were detectives, and something would happen. Let's say, for example, there's a robbery. He'll start off, it's in Los Angeles, back in the 60s, and then they start off looking at this. This is the city, Los Angeles, California. That's the way it always started. 3 million people live here, but when somebody breaks the law, that's when Joe Friday, get involved. And then he'll say, it was a Thursday afternoon, my partner and I were working robbery division. We got a phone call. So this is the way the story went. And so then they would go down to wherever the robbery took place, and they would begin to talk to the people, to collect. All they had is somebody reports. I remember one of them was fur coats. Somebody stole fur coats. Why people wanted fur coats in California, I don't know. They didn't cover that in the show.
I was just young.
Yeah. So they had fur coats stolen. And so they go down and they interview the person, what happened, when did it happen. And what he would always say is just the facts. Somebody would, he'd say, well, anybody that you recognize did this, anybody you think might have done this, sir? He said, yeah. I fired a guy last week. He said he would get me back. And then he would go on talking about the guy and all this. And then Joe Friday would stop him and say, listen, sir, just the facts. Just the facts, sir. Don't tell me, you didn't like this guy, didn't like the way he looked. Just give me the facts. When did you hire him? When did you fire him? What did he say? When did he say it? When did you find out this stuff was missing? And so some people take that approach to history, that it's just the facts. Just tell me what happened and where and when and who did it. That's it. We move to the next event. But there's more to history than just the facts. Now, obviously, you got to know the facts. And a lot of people don't know the facts, and we spend a lot of our time in history classes talking about the facts, especially in lower level classes. But you also have to interpret the events. Why did the person do what they did? What does it mean? Is there a pattern? Does this relate to something before? Let me just give you one example. I told you I was teaching this course, or a similar course to this one, in the fall of 2001. And the class met, as I remember it, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on a Tuesday morning in September, the 11th, it was a Tuesday morning. You can check it. I'm pretty sure it was. I go into class. I think class started about 11 o'clock. That's my recollection. It was late morning. And by that time, I had heard that something had happened in New York. I had heard rumors of things that maybe happened or were going to happen in Chicago, although that didn't happen. They were going to hit the Sears Tower, that other tall buildings were going to be targeted. Maybe they would have been. But what had happened after the first event is they grounded all airplanes, right? So you're only dealing with the planes that were up in the air, and they told everybody else to land. All right, so, that may be a dim. Anybody here remember that at all? You were like, what, 3?
I'm from New York, so I remember bits and pieces.
Remember bits and pieces of it? But you weren't very old, though, right? Because that's now, well, not quite 17 years ago. So most of you couldn't have been too old when that happened. Well, anyway, as the story unfolds, as you probably know, the events, the plane out of New York, right? One out of Boston. There's Boston, and it hits New York, and there's one that was turning. It was one hit Washington, D.C. There was another plane that was being turned, and it was going to come back. The idea of that one probably was to hit the White House, I think, or the Congress, the building there where Congress meets, Capitol building. That one didn't make it, right, because of the people on the plane. Anyway, so, if you read what was going on here or listened to the news here, it was guys from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, guys from the Middle East, Muslims, who took over the planes and had planned this attack, right? Now, I was teaching this class at that time, and like you, I'm asking you to look at newspapers. I was asking them to look at newspapers. And so this, of course, is coming in the newspapers. The students are interested, so they picked a lot of those articles. And immediately, in the newspapers in the Middle East, their theory about what happened at 9/11 was completely different, many of them, than what we are hearing in the United States. They were saying no. Like, for example, I remember one Egyptian paper. One of the guys was Egyptian. There was an interview with his father. His father said, no, my son was not even in the United States. My son had nothing to do with this, and so forth. And so then what emerges, interestingly, in these stories is that many people believed in the Middle East that this was not carried out by Muslims, but people who pretended to be Muslims. Because they said, who benefits from this? Well, in their minds, of course, it was Israel. It was the Mossad, Israeli secret, sort of like the CIA of Israel. And that they had done this. Why? To motivate the United States to take a firmer stand against terrorism and Muslims and people in the Middle East, and that would end up supporting Israel.
They're nihilistic. No.
So, anyway, I'm just giving you that people can look, people can look at the same events, the same facts, the same things, and they can come up with very different interpretations. Okay? So in history, what we have to look at is, yes, we have to look at the facts, but we also then have to try to understand the events that happened, the things that took place, why did it happen, and so forth. And of course, now, after I was teaching a class in 2001, now we're in 2018, right? Not quite 17 years later, we've had a little more distance on this event. There are people in the United States who have posted videos who claim that George Bush, the president, and Dick Cheney, the vice president, had ordered this event to happen.
Or a jet fuel thing or whatever.
There's all kinds of theories that come out. Right? All right. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is, what is history? How do we understand it? And it's more than just the facts. All right, we got a few minutes left. Let me move to something different. When we think about the Middle East, tell me what images come to your mind when you think about the Middle East.
We always think of like Islam and
Islam.
Peddlers and everything, and Arabs and everything, but actually, Mesopotamia, which is Iraq, is like the cradle of civilization, and like really, where all
Right.
comes from, because they say that's.
So you think about the, the cultural history of the Middle East, coming from Mesopotamia. You think about Arabs. You think about Islam.
Like the Middle East, it's like, the place where like everything like began, or like where everyone originated.
Okay. Yeah, where civilizations began. What else do you think about when you hear about the Middle East? Think about the Middle East. Anything else?
Oil.
Oil. A lot of oil in the Middle East.
Sand.
Sand.
Fighting.
Fighting. What kind of fighting?
Um,
I mean, there's lots of.
kind of like outside versus then, and also internal.
Okay.
Internal and external.
So external conflicts, internal conflicts. Okay, when you see people from the Middle East in movies or television, what do you see? What kind of characters are portrayed in television shows or movies that you've seen that have somebody from the Middle East?
They're either like the bad guy or like the really good guy.
Okay, bad guy in what way?
Like they're the terrorists.
Terrorists. I'd say the dominant image of Arabs or Muslims in our culture, media, is as a terrorist, right? Somebody that's going to blow something up or,
Strap a bomb.
yeah, wear a suicide vest or take somebody hostage, okay?
Or chop off someone's head.
Chop off their head. Yes, all these things are there. So this image is now, certainly since 9/11, is radically changed. The image of guys from the Middle East prior to 9/11 in movies and things was the oil. They were really rich guys, and you probably haven't seen too many of these movies. The really rich guys who, have like big yachts or whatever, big parties, and they get, all the ladies, right? And they have all the money. And they're sort of like a playboy, like an Arab playboy, oil chic person. That was sort of the stereotype for a long time. I'd say probably in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s even. It began to shift in the 90s and certainly today. So what we don't normally think about are things coming from the Middle East. For many, many years, certainly during the medieval period, and in this class we've got to try to cover from the rise of Islam, so let's say in the 600s, roughly 600, to today. That's a long time, all right? We got 1,400 years of history to cover. But during the medieval period, in what I like to tell people, in the medieval period, if you were sick, if you had something wrong with you and nobody knew what it was, even if they did know what it was, you would probably be better off being in Baghdad than Paris. Because medicine and advances in medicine and so forth actually were more advanced. And for many years, the Middle East was far more advanced than the West, than Europe, or Paris, London, so forth, Rome. That, of course, has shifted in the modern era. So what we often don't talk about is the cultural debt that we have to the Middle East in the West, or the whole world, but certainly in the West. Things like philosophy and medicine and astronomy and geometry and algebra. By the way, do you know algebra is an Arabic word? Any word that we have that has an AL prefix, almost every one of those comes right out of Arabic, because AL is the definite article in Arabic, like the.
Allergic.
What's that?
Allergic.
Maybe allergic, certainly algorithm, algebra, alcohol, alkaline, a lot of chemical terms, a lot of terms from chemistry and astronomy and science. A word like zenith. A lot of the names of all the constellations find their derivation from that. In astronomy, philosophy, medicine, a lot of dealings in that. Let's just think about coffee and sugar, lots of other things we get from the Middle East. But here's two things that many people are addicted to in the West. Found their origin coming from the world of the Middle East. Now, sugar cane is originally from India, but it was cultivated by the Muslims and the Arabs, and then spreads to Europe that way. And certainly coffee comes from Arabia, southern Arabia. They cultivate it also in East Africa. And so we see that the Middle East is very advanced then compared to the West. For hundreds of years, certainly starting and being in the medieval period.
Now it's the opposite now.
Right, and this is the thing that has created some of the tension in the Middle East. Because we don't think of them today as being advanced culturally or technologically. Maybe I can do one more. We still got 2 minutes left. All right, so let's do this. I'll try to get through this one. What is the Middle East? I mentioned this earlier when we were just going over the syllabus. What's the Middle East? We might think we know, but not everyone has the same definition. Does it include Muslims? The Muslims, do all the Muslims live in the Middle East? No, they do not. In fact, the largest majority of Muslims don't live in the Middle East. You might find that surprising, depending on how you define the Middle East, because a lot of Muslims live in Indonesia, they live in Pakistan, they live in Afghanistan, and Asia. Most people don't count those as being the Middle East. Here's another thing that I would say. Not all Arabs are Muslims, and not all Muslims are Arabs. So there are people in the Middle East who are of Arab descent, who speak Arabic, who are not Muslim. Now, those numbers are getting smaller because there's a lot of persecution of Christians, a lot of them fleeing wars and conflicts in Egypt and Syria and so forth. So when we think about what is an Arab world and what is the Middle East, well, we have to know that the Middle East is going to encompass people who are not Arabs. For example, Persia or Iran those people are not Arabs. Okay? Iranians are not Arabs. Iranians are Iranian. They speak Persian. They have a different ethnic background, different language. You might think about what makes somebody an Arab or what makes somebody a part of a group. Typically, it's their language and their history. Also, Iraq are Arabs. But Turkey, the Turks are not Arabs. Definitely not. I can guarantee you that. Turks and Arabs typically don't get along at all or very well. All right? Because Turks are actually coming from Central Asia and they speak a different language. They speak Turkish. It's not Arabic at all. All right, well, we'll leave it there for now. So I want you to look over make sure you get your textbooks, begin reading what I've posted, and I'll be posting more as we go along.